The first omen came in silence. Cyril, lawmaster of the Grey Havens, was the kind of man who trusted silence more than parchment. He had spent 40 years inside archives where storms of words battered against the walls, yet silence always carried the heavier truth. That night, while the lantern guttered low and the tide muttered against the harbor stones, he noticed the stars on his map were no longer still. The map was not ink and vellum, but a panel of crystal kept in a chest older than the kingdom itself. Normally it lay dormant, the constellations fixed and lifeless. Tonight, however, faint silver sparks drifted across its surface, as if the heavens themselves had been unsettled. One star detached from the cluster over Lake Evendim and slid westward, leaving behind a wake of dull light. When it stopped, a name surfaced like breath rising from deep water. Elendor. Cyril's throat tightened. That name had no business moving. Elendor, heir of Isildur, should have rested forever in the crypts of Fernost, carved in stone like every other king of Arnor. Yet here, in the unyielding stillness of the crystal map, his tomb had shifted, as though the land itself had decided to hide him elsewhere. The lawmaster pressed his hand against the glowing panel, feeling a tremor travel into his bones. It was not the tremor of fear, but of recognition. Something had been disturbed, and the world had answered with a whisper. He knew better than to dismiss whispers. Whispers, given time, became storms. He extinguished the lantern, sealed the chest, and sent for the only man who could be trusted with a question this large. Calamir arrived before dawn, a tall figure with a ranger's caution written into his stride. His cloak was ragged with rain, his boots scarred by travel, and yet he carried himself with the quiet weight of a man who knew his lineage could both protect and condemn him. The blood of Numenor ran in his veins, though he never spoke of it. He preferred shadows to thrones. When Cyril revealed the crystal map, the ranger did not feign surprise. He studied the shifting star in silence, jaw set, eyes unreadable. The lawmaster watched him closely. Calamir had the look of someone who had already carried too many burdens, and this was another. "Why summon me?" Calamir finally asked, his voice low. "Because," Cyril answered, "you know the land better than anyone alive. And because you understand what it means when the dead do not stay where they were laid." The ranger's gaze lingered on Elendor's name. There was no pride in his expression, only the weary resignation of someone staring at a responsibility he wished he could refuse. "What do you expect me to find?" Calamir asked. "Not bones," said Cyril. "Truth. And if truth cannot be carried, then at least the reason it was hidden." The air between them felt heavy, thickened by secrets neither wanted to voice. For long moments, the only sound was the tide groaning against the docks. At last, Calamir pulled the map case toward him, buckled it across his shoulder, and nodded once. As dawn broke, he rode east. The world met him with a strange unease. Birds flew in crooked patterns as if avoiding some unseen line in the sky. A shepherd's dog howled at the air and would not be silenced. Travelers he passed on the road seemed restless, glancing often over their shoulders though no pursuer followed them. Calamir kept to his saddle, saying nothing, but he felt it too. The land was holding its breath. By dusk he reached the low ridges beyond the Barrow Downs. There, on a hill where the grass grew thin, he stopped to rest his horse. As he poured water from a skin, a gust of wind stirred the tall grass, and for an instant he thought he heard his name spoken in the rush. Not by voice, but by memory. He stood very still, scanning the fields. Nothing moved except the shadows of the barrows. Yet the feeling clung to him, cold and insistent. He was being invited. Not threatened, not chased, invited. It was then he understood what Cyril had not said aloud. This was not a summons to uncover a forgotten tomb. This was the beginning of a trial. Elendor's name had shifted on the map because the dead had left behind something more dangerous than bones. A dream. Calamir tightened his cloak and led his horse toward Fernost. The ruined city waited in the distance, black against the bruised horizon. He did not know yet what kind of dream he was walking into, only that once a dream stirs, it never truly returns to sleep. The road to Fernost was less a path than a scar. Grass had grown over most of the stones, but the line of it still cut the land like a memory that refused to heal. Calamir followed it in silence, each hoofbeat echoing against the hollow bones of the hills. He had walked ruins before, gun doors, scattered watchtowers, the broken forts of Ridor, but Fernost was different. Fernost had been a crown once. Even in ruin, it carried itself with the pride of a toppled giant. The wind carried the faint tang of iron through the shattered arches, and the shadows of fallen spires spread long across the courtyard. The ranger dismounted and tied his horse at the edge of the square. He stood for a long moment in the center of the silent city, listening. Cities breathe even when they are dead. You can hear them in the shifting stone, in the whisper of rats and moss. Fernost, however, felt too still, as if the ruin itself were waiting. Sarah found him there. He turned at the sound of quick, deliberate steps. A woman approached, cloaked in travel gear, carrying a satchel heavy with scrolls and ink. Her hair was unbound, and her face carried the look of someone who had wrestled with too many late nights among manuscripts. "You're late," Calamir said, though he had not expected her at all. "You didn't think the lawmaster would send you alone, did you?" she replied, brushing past him with little ceremony. She knelt at the steps of the great hall and began unpacking her tools. "My name is Sarah. I keep records. More importantly, I can read what you cannot." Calamir studied her, unsure whether to be grateful or burdened. Rangers trusted silence more than company. Yet there was something about her briskness, her refusal to treat him with awe or suspicion, that set her apart from the usual scholars. "You've read of Elendor?" he asked. "I've studied him," she said. "The last heir who fought at his father's side, the one whose name ends the line of the northern kings. Every account says his tomb is here, in the royal vaults. But if that were true, your lawmaster wouldn't be losing sleep." Her words carried no mockery, only the sharp edge of curiosity. She was not here to flatter. She was here to cut through the fog. Together they descended into the crypts beneath the hall. The air grew colder with each step, their lanterns casting uneven light against the walls. Stone doors lined the corridor, each etched with the names of Arnor's kings. The place should have been comforting in its order, but Calamir felt his skin tighten. Something was wrong. They found Terendur's tomb, then Malvagil's, then Arvejui's, all where they should be, all marked with runes worn by centuries. Finally, they reached the panel that should have borne Elendor's name. It was blank. No carving. No chisel marks. No evidence it had ever held a name at all. Sarah traced her fingers across the smooth marble, frowning. "This is no vandal's work," she whispered. "It was made to be forgotten. As if he had never lived." Calamir said nothing. His chest felt heavy, the way it had when he'd stood over the graves of fallen companions with no words left to give them. To erase a man was crueler than to kill him. Behind them, a draft stirred. The lantern flame shivered. Sarah crouched at the base of the slab, where faint lines had been etched so shallow they were nearly invisible. She leaned close, brushing away centuries of dust. "Not gone," she murmured. "Hidden." The lines formed a sigil, a crescent paired with a broken crown. She whispered the words as they revealed themselves. "Seek the throne that drinks no wine, where shattered crowns reflect the stars." Calamir knelt beside her, studying the mark. The words pulled at him like a tide, and though he had no scholar's tongue, he understood what they meant. A riddle. A direction. Not here. Somewhere else. The air pressed heavier around them. Sarah looked up, her voice lowered. "We are not the first to stand here." In the far end of the corridor, a shadow shifted. A figure lingered at the edge of the light, not beast, not wraith, but something older, robed and still, watching them with the patience of stone. Calamir's hand went to the hilt of his sword. Sarah froze, ink-stained fingers hovering above the rune. The figure did not move closer. Its voice came soft, like gravel sifted through water. "Some dreams are buried to save the living. Leave this place before you wake what cannot be put back to sleep." Then the shadow receded, vanishing into the deeper dark. Neither spoke for a long time. The only sound was Sarah's quickened breath and the low thud of Calamir's heart. At last, Sarah rose, brushing the dust from her knees. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the same unease he felt. "The riddle speaks of the lake," she said. "Even dim. The water that mirrors the sky." Calamir exhaled slowly, fingers still tight on his sword hilt. The crypt behind them was silent once more, but silence now had teeth. They had not uncovered Elendor's tomb. They had uncovered an invitation. They traveled in silence for 2 days, moving north through valleys where the grass lay flattened as if something unseen had passed before them. Sarah kept her notes close, repeating the riddle under her breath, as if speaking it might tame its strangeness. "Seek the throne that drinks no wine, where shattered crowns reflect the stars." Calamir said little, but every time she glanced at him, his jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the horizon. By the third night, the air changed. The wind carried the smell of deep water, and the path opened to the cliffs of Lake Evendim. It was a mirror vast enough to swallow the sky. The ruins of Animinus stood broken along its shores, their toppled columns reaching like pale fingers into the water. At twilight, the surface of the lake shimmered not only with stars, but with something brighter, something that pulsed beneath like a heartbeat. Sarah exhaled a sound halfway between awe and dread. "It's alive." Calamir did not answer. He was staring at the reflection of the crowns, statues half buried along the shoreline, their shattered helms glinting faintly in the starlight. It was the riddle made flesh. They found the passage hidden between 2 fallen kings. Moss concealed the entrance, but a draft of cold air drifted upward, carrying with it the faint smell of ash. Lanterns lit, they descended into the earth. The chamber beneath was unlike any ruin Sarah had seen. It was not a crypt, not exactly. The floor was tiled with obsidian stars, polished so smooth the lantern light scattered as though they were walking across a night sky. In the center stood a single sarcophagus, black as frozen glass, its surface veined with faint silver lines that shifted when viewed from the corner of the eye. Sarah approached slowly, her fingers trembling as she reached to touch the lid. But before she could, the air changed. A voice echoed, not from the walls, but from within their bones. "Why do you come where silence was chosen?" Both froze. Calamir's hand went to his sword, though he knew steel was useless against voices born of stone. The shadows along the chamber stirred, gathering into the shape of a hooded figure. Not wraith, not flesh. Something in between. Its face was hidden, but its presence carried a gravity that bent the air. Sarah spoke first, her voice quivering yet firm. "We seek Elendor. His tomb is missing. His memory erased." The figure tilted its head, the motion slow, deliberate. "Erased? No. Preserved. What is hidden is not lost, it is guarded. To protect you from it, and it from you." Calamir stepped forward, his tone sharper. "A king's bones are not a weapon." The figure's reply was like iron dragged across stone. Not his bones. His dream. Silence fell heavy. Sarah's lips parted, words caught in her throat. Calamir, however, felt something twist deep inside him. Dreams. He had lived his life carrying the burdens of forgotten kingdoms, the promises of ancestors who never returned. A dream was more dangerous than any blade. A dream could set nations burning. He looked at Sarah, she was pale, her eyes wide. She whispered, "If that's true, then we've come not to uncover a body, but a prophecy." The hooded figure did not deny it. Instead, it stepped aside. And as it did, the sarcophagus glowed faintly, silver veins brightening like cracks in a night sky. Sarah's lantern flickered, and in its light she saw words beginning to surface across the lid, elvish script rising like frost. She leaned closer, lips moving as she read, "Here lies Elendor, keeper of the fire unspent. May it burn when the world grows cold." The letters flared, then dimmed. Sarah stumbled back, clutching her satchel. "This isn't a tomb. It's a vault." Calamir stared at the lid, his breath shallow. He felt the weight of centuries pressing on him, not as dust, but as expectation. Whatever lay inside, it was meant to sleep. And yet, by standing here, by knowing, they had already disturbed it. The hooded figure's voice broke the silence again. "Every dream longs to wake. The question is, who will bear it when it does?" The chamber trembled. A thin crack split across the seal of the sarcophagus, releasing a faint rush of air that smelled of rain and fire. The silver veins pulsed once, twice, like a heartbeat struggling to rise. Sarah's hand found Calamir's arm, her voice low, urgent. "We shouldn't be here." But it was too late. The tomb was no longer sleeping. It was listening. The crack in the sarcophagus widened with a faint hiss, as though stone itself exhaled. A breath of air escaped, warm, tinged with the smell of rain on scorched earth. Calamir flinched, his instincts screaming that this was not the air of the dead, but the breath of something waiting. Sarah staggered back, lantern raised, her eyes glistening with both fear and wonder. "It's alive," she whispered. "Not flesh, not bone, but something alive in spirit." The hooded figure's voice carried across the chamber like distant thunder. "It is not meant for your hands." Elendor foresaw the hunger of men. He saw how dreams, once spoken, become weapons. Calamir's jaw tightened. Then why preserve it at all? Why not bury it so deep the world forgets? "Because the world forgets too easily," the guardian answered. "And when memory dies, hope dies with it. This is not for power. It is for endurance, a light meant for a time when all other fires fail." The ranger turned away, pacing, the glow from the sarcophagus painting his face in harsh lines. He had carried too many burdens, too many graves that sang of forgotten promises. The thought of another prophecy, another chain disguised as a beacon, churned in him like acid. "I've seen men die chasing promises," he said hoarsely. "I've buried brothers who believed a dream would save them. All it saved was the dirt covering their bones." Sarah's voice cut across his bitterness, sharp but trembling. "And I've watched kingdoms crumble because they lost their stories. Calamir, maybe you've carried graves, but I've carried silence, the kind that swallows whole lineages. If Elendor's dream was hidden, maybe it wasn't to chain us. Maybe it was to remind us we're more than what's left behind." Her words struck him harder than he wanted to admit. She was right, history was not stone. It was a fragile thread, always one fire away from ash. But the crack was spreading. The silver veins along the lid pulsed steadily now, a heartbeat finding rhythm. Suddenly the ground shook, dust raining from the ceiling. Far above, a sound like rolling thunder echoed, not weather, but something shifting in the lake itself. The stars reflected on the obsidian floor flickered, as if the night sky had blinked. Sarah clutched her satchel to her chest. "It's not just us. The world is responding." The hooded figure raised its staff, driving the point into the stone. The tremor stilled, but the air hummed with restrained force. "Choose," it said, voice hard as iron. "Seal the dream again, or carry it out of this tomb. There is no middle path. Every heartbeat you hesitate feeds the hunger outside." Calamir stared at the guardian. "What hunger?" The hood turned slightly, as though listening to something far away. "Shadows stir in the east. The forgotten hunger for fire they did not earn. They will come for it, whether you bear it or not. Decide." The ranger's hand clenched around his sword hilt. He had faced orcs, trolls, and worse, but this was a different battlefield. To carry the dream was to invite every enemy of light. To leave it sealed was to risk silence swallowing hope forever. Both choices were traps, and both carried a cost he could not yet measure. Sarah stepped closer to him, her eyes bright, defiant. "You can't walk away from this, Calamir. You're Isildur's blood. Whether you wanted it or not, the line of kings runs in you. If Elendor entrusted this dream to be guarded, maybe it was for you to find." Her words cut like a blade. He had spent his life running from the shadow of bloodlines, burying the truth beneath a ranger's cloak. To hear it spoken aloud was a wound he had never healed. He turned on her, anger flashing in his voice. "Do not mistake heritage for destiny. I am no king. I will not chain myself to their mistakes." Sarah didn't flinch. She stepped closer still. "Then don't. Be better. Guard it not as a king, but as yourself. As the man who listens to silence, who carries burdens without asking for crowns." The chamber seemed to tighten around them, the air growing heavy, the silver veins pulsing faster. The dream wanted a bearer. It wanted a voice. Calamir's breath came rough, his hand trembling as he stared at the glowing lid. In his chest, war raged, the man who wanted to walk away, and the man who could not abandon what the world might need. The Guardian lowered its hood slightly, revealing eyes like embers burning under ash. Decide. The dream will not wait. Calamir stepped forward, palm hovering over the fractured seal. His heart pounded, torn between fear and duty. Behind him, Sarah's voice softened, breaking the silence like a prayer. Sometimes we don't choose the dream. Sometimes it chooses us. The lid flared with silver light, and Calamir's hand finally touched the stone. The stone flared beneath Calamir's hand, silver veins racing across the sarcophagus like lightning trapped in glass. The crack split wide with a sound like ice shearing on a frozen river. For a breathless instant, the air in the chamber held still, then rushed outward in a violent exhale that extinguished their lanterns. Darkness swallowed them. And in that darkness, a light bloomed. Not flame, not lantern glow. It was the pale radiance of memory itself, unfurling like a dawn that had been trapped too long. The sarcophagus shuddered, the lid sliding aside without touch. From within rose no corpse, no bones, but a scroll bound in wax and star metal bands. The light came from it, pulsing with each heartbeat of the earth. Sarah gasped. A dream, sealed in words. The hooded guardian bowed its head, staff trembling against the stone. Once spoken, it cannot be unsaid. Calamir reached, but his hand shook. His chest burned with a war older than himself, duty against despair. He had never wanted crowns, never wanted prophecies. But the dream was awake, and in its light he saw himself reflected 100-fold, as though every choice he had ever made stared back at him. His voice broke. I am not strong enough. Sarah turned toward him, eyes wet with the same silver glow. That's what makes you worthy. Kings think they are born strong. You know the weight of being human. Her hand closed over his, steadying him. Together, they lifted the scroll. The wax cracked. The metal bands fell away. The scroll unfurled with a sigh like wind across a graveyard, and the chamber dissolved. They were no longer standing in stone, but inside the dream itself. The lake lay before them, stretched endless, reflecting a sky torn by fire. Towers of Animinus burned again, not in ruin but in prophecy. Armies moved like shadows across plains that had once been green. Calamir felt the heat of battle, the cries of men who bore his blood. Then light. From the wreckage, a single figure emerged, cloaked in white flame, not crowned but carrying the broken shards of a crown. He walked across the burning water, each step quenching fire beneath him. His voice thundered through the vision. When night devours all, one will carry the fire unspent. Not to rule, but to endure. Not to command, but to remember. The dream is not mine, it is yours. Guard it, or it will consume you. The figure's gaze fell directly on Calamir. For a moment, the ranger felt naked, every fear exposed, the fear of failing, the fear of bloodline, the fear that he was only the echo of men braver than he. The weight crushed him to his knees. I can't, he whispered, tears streaking his dirt-stained face. I cannot be him. The fiery figure bent, placing the broken crown at his feet. Then be you. The fire does not ask for kings. It asks for keepers. The vision shattered. They were back in the chamber. The scroll lay open in Calamir's hands, glowing faintly, the words now carved into his memory. Sarah knelt beside him, trembling. The guardian stood silent, its hood bowed as though mourning. Calamir looked at the words and realized they were not prophecy in the old sense. They were not commands or visions of glory. They were warnings, reminders, seeds. That memory must be guarded. That fire is not inheritance, but choice. That the dream survives only if born with humility. He understood then, the danger was not in the dream itself, but in what men might make of it. His hand shook as he rolled the scroll closed. The light dimmed, though a faint silver glow clung to his skin. He turned to the guardian. Why me? He asked, voice raw. The hood lifted slightly. Within the shadowed cowl, two ember-like eyes glowed. Because you are the only one who does not want it. The chamber fell silent again. The tremors stilled. The lake above calmed. Yet Calamir knew nothing was the same. The dream had chosen him, and in choosing, it had marked him. Sarah touched his arm gently. What now? Calamir stared at the sealed scroll, then at the obsidian walls around them. His voice was steady, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. Now we keep it. Not as kings. Not as prophets. As witnesses. For the first time in years, he felt tears burn his eyes, not of weakness, but of something heavier, acceptance. The dream was no longer asleep. It was alive inside him. And the world would feel it. The scroll lay sealed once more, its glow muted to a steady silver ember. Calamir cradled it as though it were both weapon and child, and for the first time he felt the strange paradox of its weight, lighter than air, heavier than stone. The guardian lowered its staff, voice quieter now, as if the dream itself had drained its strength. The tomb has given its burden. My watch ends. Yours begins. The hooded figure's outline wavered, thinning into smoke. Before vanishing, it left them with a final murmur. Guard it with silence, or you will guard only ash. Then it was gone, and the chamber was theirs alone. Sarah rose unsteadily, brushing dust from her knees, though her hands still trembled. She looked at Calamir, at the shadow on his face that seemed both older and clearer than before. So it's done, she said softly. He shook his head. No, it has only begun. They climbed back through the passage and emerged beneath the open sky. Lake Evendim stretched endless before them, the stars mirrored on its surface more brilliantly than ever. For a long time they stood there in silence, the night wind tangling their cloaks, as though the lake itself were holding its breath. Sarah finally broke the stillness. You could destroy it, she said. Cast it into the water. Let it sink where no hand will ever find it again. Calamir turned the scroll in his hand, watching the faint shimmer beneath its seal. His voice was quiet, but there was no hesitation in it. I thought of it. But it would not end there. Dreams do not drown. They find their way back. Better that we carry it than leave it to chance. Sarah studied him, her expression torn between relief and sorrow. Then you've accepted it. He gave a humorless smile. I've accepted nothing. Only that silence is not the same as forgetting. Someone must remember, even when no one else will. As dawn crept over the lake, the world seemed to shift with it. Fishermen on the far shore paused mid-net, gazing at the water as though hearing a song beneath the waves. Birds wheeled overhead in restless patterns. Even the ruins of Anna Minus glowed faintly in the new light, like embers long hidden now stirring awake. Sarah felt the change deep in her chest. The dream is already moving, she whispered. Calamir closed his eyes. He could feel it too. A thrum beneath his ribs, a fire that was not his yet burned through him all the same. He thought of the vision, cities burning, the figure walking across water, the broken crown. It was not destiny. It was warning. And warnings had to be heeded. They rode south in silence, leaving the lake behind them. Sarah began filling her satchel with new notes, her quill scratching in bursts whenever they stopped. She no longer wrote as a mere scribe. She wrote as someone preparing a map for those yet to come, not of roads and rivers, but of choices. Calamir, meanwhile, left small tokens along the path, a notch carved into a tree, a silver mark pressed into soft earth. Symbols only those who knew silence would recognize. He was no king, no prophet, but he would build a watch in his own way. As days passed, the world itself seemed unsettled. Farmers spoke of dreams they could not explain. Merchants whispered of shadows growing restless in the east. The air carried a faint electricity, like the pause before a storm breaks. Everywhere they went, Calamir felt eyes on them, not hostile yet, but searching, as though the dream itself had called attention to its new keepers. On their final night before parting ways, they camped beneath the bare limbs of an ancient oak. The fire was small, their words smaller still. When Sarah finally asked where he would go, Calamir stared into the embers for a long time before answering. Wherever silence is breaking, he said. She nodded, as if that was the only answer she had expected. Then she pressed her hand briefly to his, not in farewell, but an oath. I'll keep the records. You keep the watch. They shared no more words, for words would have been too fragile for what bound them now. At dawn, Sarah took the road toward Gundor, the satchel heavy at her side. Calamir rode north into the mists, the scroll strapped across his chest like a second heart. Behind them, the lake gleamed one last time before swallowing its light. The ruins stood watch, silent, solemn, eternal. And in the far east, unseen by them both, shadows stirred awake. The dream had passed from tomb to keeper. It no longer slept. The world would not, could not, remain the same.